Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Los Angeles Public Library's YouTube and Facebook channels. I'm Madeline Bryant. I'm Principal Librarian of Youth Services here at the Los Angeles Public Library, and I want to welcome you to today's special program. I'm so pleased that you could all join us this afternoon. We have a very special guest today from the Los Angeles Conservancy. Her name is Sana, and she is the Student and Family Program Manager there. And we are going to take a virtual field trip to Chinatown and Union Station. And in particular, we're going to hear about the women who helped build them. I am intrigued. So thank you, Sana, for being here today and joining us, and welcome.
Thank you, Madeline. I'm very excited to be here today and take you all on a virtual adventure learning about the important histories of Union Station and Chinatown. Before we begin, I want to tell you a little bit about the Los Angeles Conservancy. I invite you all to take a guess, or maybe you already know, what do you think it is that we do at the Los Angeles Conservancy? And I'll give you a clue. Think about the word conserve. What does it mean to conserve? And what do you think we conserve at the Los Angeles Conservancy?
Well, one of my guesses is buildings.
Buildings. Anyone else? Any other ideas? Buildings. Conserve means to save or protect. And at the Los Angeles Conservancy, both Madeline and Tiffany are correct. We work to protect and save historic buildings in all of Los Angeles County, including the Central Los Angeles Library, which was our very first preservation project, the reason why we formed as an organization. Today, we'll be exploring two historic areas near downtown Los Angeles, Union Station, and Chinatown. Let's begin our adventure. So I invite you all to share, if you're comfortable doing so, where are you tuning in from? This is a map showing part of Southern California. It doesn't showcase all the neighborhoods and cities that make up wonderful Southern California, but if you do find your city or neighborhood on this map, I invite you to share in the chat. I'm tuning in from Hawthorne today. I wanted to get us oriented to think about where we all are in relation to where we are going. So continue to share in the chat if you would like to do so, to let me know where you're tuning in from today. I'm going to zoom in to show us closer to where we are going in to visiting near downtown Los Angeles. So we are visiting Union Station and Chinatown. You can see that these two historic areas are very close to each other. Let me know in the chat, have any of you visited either of these locations before? Let me know if you have, and if you have, what were you doing there? Wow, we have a friend joining us from 3,000 miles away. Welcome. I'm glad you're able to virtually explore with us today. That's the best part about our virtual field trip, is that you can explore from wherever you are in the world. All of the buildings that we'll be exploring today will tell us a story about architecture. That means how a building is designed and why it was designed a certain way, how a building looks. We'll be learning about people. We'll be learning a little bit about LA history And we'll be learning about preservation, why it's important to protect the historic buildings that we'll be learning about today. What's interesting about today's adventure is not only are we going to be learning about women who are connected to Union Station and Chinatown, we will also be learning about Asian American history that is important to Los Angeles. A question I'd like to ask all of you, and a question that I'd like for you to think about as we continue to explore, is why is it important to learn about the stories of Asian Americans? May celebrates Asian American Pacific Islander heritage, and today we'll be learning about specific stories relating to Chinatown. So why is it important to learn about these stories? What do you all think? Any ideas? And there's no one right answer for this question. It's a question I'd like for you to be curious about as we continue to explore. Why is it important to learn these stories? I'll give you all a moment to think about that before I move forward. If anyone has any ideas to share. All right. Keep this question in mind as we begin our adventure. Our story actually begins before Union Station and the Chinatown that we know today existed. On the land where Union Station is today used to be LA's first Chinatown, now referred to as Old Chinatown or Original Chinatown. When many different Chinese immigrants arrived in Los Angeles, they were treated unfairly. They weren't able to own land and live in certain parts of the city. But there was an area near where Union Station is today where there was many farms and vineyards. One of those vineyards was owned by Maria del Espíritu Santo Blanco. And she needed help at her vineyard, so she hired many of the Chinese immigrants. They were able to live on her land and help her with her vineyards. A vineyard is a type of place where special grapes are grown to make wine. Eventually, many different Chinese immigrants came to this area, came to live in this area, that they started their own neighborhood, LA's first Chinatown. This was a thriving neighborhood where almost 200 buildings existed. An opera house, restaurants, many different places that people could visit. But as the city of Los Angeles changed, a need for a new transportation center was a discussion for a new transportation center was being had. And a decision was made that this transportation center should be where LA's first Chinatown was. The reason is because this first Chinatown was approximately across from El Pueblo, which is known as the birthplace of Los Angeles. Many felt that the train should arrive at that location. What happened? This Chinatown was demolished to make way for Union Station. Many of the residents were forced to leave or they left on their own until no buildings existed and Union Station construction began. While this is a sad ending, there's a happy beginning at the Chinatown that we know today, and we'll be learning about that story in the second part of our adventure. Union Station opened in 1939 with a grand party uniting the three main railroads at the time, the Southern Pacific, the Santa Fe, and the Union Pacific. This is an interesting photo I show you all as Union Station is being constructed, and there's structures from Chinatown that are still standing. These two stories right next to each other as one ends and another begins. It's interesting to think about these layers of history. Fast forward to the future, Union Station is still a transportation center that now unites different types of transportation serving Los Angeles. The Metro rail line, which is a light rail that travels above ground and below ground. These are different colors, soon to be different letters, the red line or the blue line. Let me know in the chat if you've ever taken the metro. I used to take the metro to work before the pandemic started, and I actually do miss riding the metro, even though it was delayed many times. Let me know in the chat if you also are a metro rider. The Amtrak train, which is a type of train that travels further distances, travels to different cities and states all over the United States. Has anyone taken the Amtrak before? Amtrak is a really fun way to travel through the US. It travels through different routes that roads do not pass through. So it's a really great way to see different landscapes of this country. Another type of transportation is the Metrolink. The Metrolink is another type of train that travels through different counties. So if you wanted to go from Los Angeles County to Orange County, where Disneyland is, you could take the Metrolink. So it doesn't go quite as far as the Amtrak, but it goes further than the Metro rail line. And lastly, the public bus system. Anyone take the public bus? Public bus was also a type of transportation I would take prior to the pandemic. And I also miss riding the public bus as well. A great way to get away from traffic. We're going to take a step inside. What are some details you observe about this entrance to Union Station? We saw a few different spaces. Did you see any unique colors or shapes, designs, anything relating to the architecture? The finest materials and designs were implemented for Union Station. And it's such a wonderful place that has been restored and renovated over the years. Most recently, if anyone is familiar with the award show called the Academy Awards, or also nicknamed the Oscars, it took place this year at Union Station. And I encourage you all to visit Union Station. It has never looked better. Union Station is open during the pandemic. I'd like to tell you all about one of the spaces now. We're going to visit the Ticket Concourse. The Ticket Concourse, as you can tell by its name, is a place where tickets were once sold. This space no longer is used for that purpose. It's now used for special events, such as the Oscars that actually were filmed in this specific location. What's interesting about this space are two details I'd like to share with you all, and a story. One of those details is that Union Station has acoustic tile in its ceiling. Acoustic tile is a type of tile that has tiny little holes that absorb sound waves. As you can imagine, this is a large open space, and at one time there used to be many passengers who were traveling through this area to purchase tickets. An acoustic tile helped absorb the sound waves so that this space would not be too noisy. And if you look down, there is beautiful stonework all throughout Union Station. Why I wanted to briefly share these two details with you is that if you do visit Union Station, make sure you look up and down and all around, because there are many cool details to observe. The story I'd like to share with you in this space is of our cola fill pop. Now, the Los Angeles Railway was not a type of transportation where you could buy a ticket for at Union Station, but the Los Angeles Railway was a transportation that arrived in front of Union Station, near Union Station. So I still wanted to share this story with you today of our cola fill pot. She was a conductor for the Los Angeles Railway F line that traveled from South Los Angeles to near Union Station. But she wasn't hired easily. During the time she wanted to be employed to be a conductor, women and people of color were not hired. She went to court to fight for her right to not only become the first woman ever hired as a conductor for the Los Angeles Railway, but also to be the first Black woman to ever be hired. So shortly after her hiring, many other women and people of color were hired by this company. What is a Los Angeles Railway? This transportation no longer exists in Los Angeles. But look at this photo. Any clues? Can you take a guess what type of transportation this was? It kind of looks like a train, but not quite. What's interesting about this is that the Los Angeles Railway were a series of streetcars. They were a type of train that traveled along tracks on streets. And in some cities, if you are lucky, you might still see the tracks still embedded in the streets. Not every city in Los Angeles, but some cities, if you look closely, you'll see the tracks that once were where the Los Angeles Railway streetcars traveled along. And here, if you look really closely, is Arcola Philpott driving this streetcar. Moving along to our next location, to the right of the entrance, we're stepping outside Union Station. Connected to the entrance is what was the Fred Harvey restaurant, is now the Imperial Western Beer Company. This beautiful space, take a look inside, has not changed much over the years. Here's a historic photo to give you comparison. A few technology updates here and there, but the design has been well preserved, well protected. Not only because it's beautiful, but it has an important story to share. Fred Harvey restaurants were a series of restaurants that existed along popular travel routes in the US. Fred Harvey hired Mary Colter to design this Fred Harvey restaurant's interior. That means the inside of the restaurant. Mary Colter was one of the very first female interior designers of her time. She was inspired by the desert to create this Fred Harvey restaurant at Union Station. You can see all of these beautiful, rich colors that remind us of the desert. Oranges, gold, browns, these deep greens. It's a beautiful space. And if you look down below, you see this beautiful tiled floor that represents a Navajo rug. Again, inspired by the tribes of the desert. Another important story I'd like to share with you all are the story of the Harvey Girls. The Harvey Girls worked as servers at the restaurants. They were hired during a time when women didn't often work. But these women were considered independent. They moved away from home so that they could earn money for themselves and to be able to send back to their families. The Harvey Girls have really unique stories because not only at Union Station, they were important figures in all of the Harvey restaurants. That's what the Fred Harvey restaurants were known for, their great service from the wonderful Harvey Girls. And these Harvey Girls are two pairs of sisters, and they're at Union Station. You can, if you recognize, you look closely, the same archways that we see in the previous photos. All right, my friends, now we're going to transition to our next area, historic Chinatown. We're going to be taking the Metro Gold Line, one of the transportations that Union Station, that is serviced at Union Station. We're going to be walking through Union Station to the Metro Gold Line stop. So this is an opportunity for y'all. If you want to get up and stretch for a little bit, you can do so. We're going to be walking past the information desk. We're going to be walking towards the trains and bus plaza. We're going to be walking through this long passageway that connects to the east end of Union Station. And we are going to board our Metro Gold Line. Before we do so, I'd like to tell you about Chu Xian Chang. She's a Chinese-American artist who was hired to design the Chinatown Metro Gold Line stop, the stop that we will be going to. She designed this stop to represent not only the Chinatown community that this Gold Line takes us to, but also she incorporated artwork that represented the communities that were there before the Chinese immigrants and Americans founded Chinatown. And there are these special benches that you can see at this stop that showcase different symbols of those different communities that lived there before this new Chinatown, which we call Chinatown now, was founded, including the Aztec or the Mayan reference to early settlers, Italian community that was once there, as well as an Eastern European Croatian community that was once there as well. So I encourage you all, if you do have an opportunity when you get to the Metro Gold Line stop, check out the public art. It tells a story like the place does as well. All right, so we're gonna board the Metro Gold Line now.
Welcome aboard the Metro Gold Line. This train's final destination is APU Citrus College Station in Azusa. Thanks for going Metro. Please be considerate of those around you and don't play loud music or take up more than one seat. If you're standing, please keep doorways clear by moving to the center of the car. Lights should be placed in the designated areas on board so they don't block access for others. And for everyone's safety and to keep service on time, please do not try to hold the doors open. The next stop is Chinatown Station. This is Chinatown Station.
All right, it's a pretty short ride. It's one stop from Union Station to Chinatown. I encourage you all, if you've never taken the Metro before, try it out. Take a ride, explore these historic areas. Walking around the corner, we are in front of the Chinatown Central Plaza. As I mentioned to you all, following the construction of Union Station, residents of Chinatown, LA's first Chinatown, were displaced. They needed a new neighborhood to live and work. And so a few different individuals started a discussion to create a new Chinatown, not very far from Union Station, as we saw in the map earlier today. 25 different individuals, of two of whom were women, had a conversation to design, manage, and create this new Chinatown with Chinese immigrants and Chinese Americans. Peter Suhu was a businessman who started these conversations, and we'll learn about the two other founders, the two women, later in our adventure today. This Chinatown Plaza opened with a fun, grand party, and we'll learn more about as we explore. Before we begin our exploration through this plaza, I want to tell you all that this plaza has a special layout. It has a series of walkways, also called pedestrian streets, that have names. And we'll specifically be learning about this street, Mingling Way, named after an important woman. The Maiwa Drum Corps paraded through Chinatown to invite people to the opening party in June 25th, 1938. They are a drum corps, an all-female drum corps that still exists today, although they do take part in different activities. All right, let's take a step into the plaza. What did you all think? I asked you all at the beginning if you visited Chinatown before. Have any of you now, maybe refresh your memory, visited this plaza before or have visited somewhere similar? LA's Chinatown is one of many Chinatowns in the United States. So it has a really important story. What's really cool are these beautiful buildings we'll be talking about next. Believe it or not, all of these colorful buildings originally did not have color. The color was added later to further invite tourists to come to this area so that they can enjoy this plaza as well as the residents and people who work there, but also to make it a place that they could contribute to the economy. So that means if people would come, they would buy different products and be able to then reinvest that money back into the neighborhood, the Chinatown neighborhood of Los Angeles. So originally they looked pretty plain, and later they were revamped to not only have beautiful colors, but these neon lights. These neon lights that at night, if you visit the plaza, in the central plaza, light up and look really cool. It's one of the cool places in Los Angeles that is full of neon lights. Two buildings close to the entrance are the YC and Mabel Hong buildings, showcased in these photos. They're named after YC and Mabel Hong, who were a married couple. YC Hong was a prominent civil rights lawyer who fought for different Asian Americans and other people of color during a time when they faced injustices. I shared with you all earlier that Chinese immigrants and Chinese Americans were not treated fairly when in LA's early history. And so YC Hong was a civil rights lawyer who helped fight for their rights. Mabel Wong was his wife. And while these two buildings were buildings where YC Hong had his businesses and operations, Mabel Hong, his wife, was the one that was managing these buildings to make sure everything was run effectively. So it's really interesting to know how they both worked together to ensure these buildings and all of the work that YC Hong did was done correctly. What's interesting about this building over here is it housed YC Hong's offices that are still well preserved today, exactly how he left them. YC Hong and Mabel Hong were also two of the founders. I mentioned there were 25 founders, including Peter Suhu. Mabel Hong and YC Hong were two of the founders of this Chinatown. We're walking along one of the pathways, Mingling Way, in the corner of Mingling Way and Mailing Way, is the 7-star cave wishing well. It was a wishing well where there are different deities important to Buddhist culture, Buddhist religion, and there are different places where you can throw coins for different fortunes. When this wishing well was first introduced into the plaza, there was a dedication ceremony. And Anna May Wong, who is considered the first Asian American woman to star in a major Hollywood movie, was invited to that party to dedicate this wishing well. And here is that photo. Interesting fact that this wishing well was actually in a different location and moved to this corner of Mingling Way and Mailing Way. Mailing Way is named after Soong Mei Ling, who was the then Republic of China president's wife. She's also known as Madame Chiang Kai-shek. She was active in being an advocate for the rights of Chinese immigrants and Chinese American communities in the United States. She campaigned throughout the US and even went to Congress. And due to her efforts in speaking up about different injustices that these individuals were facing, it is believed that she influenced the repeal, or that means the removal of an unfair law called the Chinese Exclusion Act, the unfair law that made it legal, that made it appropriate for people to treat Chinese Americans and Chinese immigrants differently and other Asian Americans differently. But now that law no longer exists, thanks to Soong Mei Ling and other individuals who spoke up about different issues facing the Chinese American and Chinese immigrant community. And this plaque here honors her and tells her story. Our last two buildings on our adventure today are telling us a story of two entrepreneurs. We'll start with Yu Hai Setuquan, who was affectionately known as Mama Kwan. Mama Kwan was the other female founder of this new Chinatown, which we call Chinatown today. So Mabel Hong, YC Hong, and Mama Kwan. Mama Kwan also is the only founder who was a resident of LA's first Chinatown. So it's interesting to know that she had a connection to both Chinatowns in Los Angeles. Mama Kwan, along with her family members, opened the Grand Star restaurant. It was a restaurant that served Chinese soul food delicacies. So pork liver, duck hash, oxtail soup, all of these yummy foods that she called Chinese soul food. She worked at this restaurant until her 90s. And now her family members, her children, and other family members manage this space, which has now called the Grand Star Jazz Club. Here she's depicted celebrating this Chinatown Plaza's 50th anniversary with then Mayor Tom Bradley with a multi-layer cake. The last story I'd like to share with you all is of Esther Wong. She was named the godmother of punk, of Western punk rock music. Any punk rock music fans in the audience? Let me know in the comments. Esther Wong opened up a punk rock venue in this yellow building, which are now called the Sun Moon Way Lofts. During the 70s and the 80s, many of the restaurants and different businesses that were in this plaza were changing. And some of these spaces were vacant. That means that they were open for different uses. Esther May Wong, along with other individuals, invited punk rock groups to play music, punk rock bands to play music in this area. And many famous punk rock groups that were local to Los Angeles and from other parts of the country, like Ramones and Los Lobos, they played here. Many of them started their careers at this venue called Madame Wong's, named after Esther Wong. After it closed down, this building had many different uses. Now there are lofts in the upper level and a storefront in the bottom level. I end with the same question I posed to you all earlier today. Why is it important to learn about the stories of Asian Americans? Today we learned about the interconnected stories of Union Station and Chinatown. In particular, we learned about these two historic areas, learning from the women who contributed to each of these locations. So I ask this question once again. Perhaps your answer has changed, or maybe you think about this question differently. Why is it important to learn about the stories of Asian Americans? Why did we learn about these two important interconnected histories today? Any ideas? I invite you all to share in the chat. If you'd like to learn more about this history of Union Station and Chinatown, or other important neighborhoods that are important to Asian Americans and other communities, I encourage you all to visit our website, laconservancy.org. In the chat, I'm also going to be sharing a link for you all to a PDF guide. It's a PDF guide that is a self-guided tour of LA's Chinatown. So if you like to explore Chinatown on your own, I encourage you all to download our guide and explore this wonderful neighborhood that tells rich, important stories that are important to the Chinese Americans and Chinese immigrants and other communities that now call this historic neighborhood home. Are there any questions for me before we move forward? Are there any questions for me before we move forward? Oh, I believe I shared the link in the wrong chat. So if one of the library friends can please share the link to the main chat, that would be helpful. Thank you. And there's our PDF, link to our PDF guide if you'd like to take your own tour of Chinatown. So any questions before we move forward? Any questions before we move forward about any histories we've learned today? Any stories about the buildings or people?
Sana, I have a question, and thank you so much for a terrific field trip. I made notes and have so many things I want to ask, but one of my questions is about, you mentioned the colors in Chinatown, which is such a huge part of going there and being there and the vibrancy of it. When was, you said originally it was not as colorful as it is now. When was the color added? What year?
So it was not too long after. So this Chinatown Plaza opened in 1938, and that photo that I showed you all was from the 1940s. So not very long after, a few years. I don't know the exact date, but within 2 years, actually about a year and a half, those colors were added. So it was not very long that those buildings were white.
Hard to even imagine. Yeah. Well, I was just looking up a few of the women in our catalog and encourage our audience that if you have any, I know, and definitely go to the LA Conservancy website because they have a treasure trove of information there. But if you want to check out books or look up more information about anything that you learned today in today's program, you can search our catalog at lapl.org. And because I'm curious, I want to know more about some of the women that you talked to. The first woman conductor was fascinating, and just so nice to know that women played a role in the architecture of, I didn't know that about the Chinatown station, which I've been to, and I'm going to take another look next time I'm there. That was just really fabulous.
Yes, and I do want to mention that many of the photos that I had in our presentation are from the library's archive. So there are many cool historic photos, many that I did not choose, that show how Chinatown has changed over the years. And I do want to mention to you all, before we end today, to think about all of these stories we learned about and why it's important to tell these stories and understand these stories and explore these buildings. I mentioned briefly to you all that Union Station is open during the pandemic, and the Central Plaza in Chinatown is accessible in the pandemic as well. So I encourage you all after today to explore these rich areas of Los Angeles, to understand their importance and to think about all of these women who contributed to these areas. And most importantly, I'd like for you all to think about why protecting and preserving these historic areas is important. Whose story would be lost if these areas were changed or no longer existed? I'll stick around for a little bit if any of you have any questions, but I just want to thank Madeline for inviting me today and sharing these stories with you all. Of course, I also want to just last thing I want to mention that these are not the only stories of Chinatown and Union Station. So I encourage you all to be curious and learn more after we end.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing the PDF of the walking tour, and I hope that our audience has enjoyed today's program. I know I really did, and I'm curious to know more. Ready to get out there and see Union Station. I haven't been there in a while, and I used to go there all the time because I also rode the train a lot. So looking forward to getting back there. Thank you so much. Everyone, if there's no last questions, we've got some thank yous. Oh, wonderful. Thank you for coming today. There is a link to our Tessa, which has access to our photo collection and lots of historical documents. Definitely worth checking out. That is a treasure trove in itself. And if you're into our 4 o'clock programs, there's an LA Made program tomorrow, and it's all about experimental quesadillas. So tune in tomorrow at 4 o'clock for that. That should be interesting. Thank you again so much, Sana. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.